On a crisp autumn evening, a young couple named Emily and Mark were driving through the dense woods of northern Michigan. They were on their way to visit his mother, who lived in a quaint, secluded town known for its charm and scenic beauty. Typically, they would have arrived in time for supper, but a series of delays and a late start had caused them to fall behind schedule. As the sun dipped down below the horizon, and darkness began to blanket the landscape, they decided it was best to find a place to stay for the night and continue the journey in the morning. As they navigated the winding road, the headlights of their car flickered across a small, dilapidated house nestled deep in the woods. It looked as though it had been forgotten by time itself, overgrown with vines and shrouded in shadows. Emily squinted through the windshield, her curiosity piqued. "Maybe they can rent us a room," she suggested, her voice tinged with hopeful optimism. Mark hesitated, but eventually agreed that it was worth checking out. They pulled up the gravel driveway, the crunching of stones under the tires the only sound breaking the eerie silence of the forest. The house, though modest, seemed warm and inviting, with a soft glow emanating from the windows. Mark knocked on the door, and after a few moments, it creaked open to reveal an elderly couple. The man was tall and wiry, with a thick white beard that nearly reached his chest. His eyes were sharp and bright, and he greeted them with a smile that seemed both kind and weary. His wife was a small, delicate woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun. She had a gentle demeanor and welcomed them with a warm hug. "We don't rent rooms," she said kindly, "but we're happy to have you stay as our guests. We have plenty of space, and we'd enjoy the company." Grateful for their hospitality, Emily and Mark accepted the offer. The old woman quickly set about preparing a pot of coffee and slicing a rich, homemade cake. They all gathered in the cozy living room, where the scents of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the sweet aromas of the cake. The walls were lined with old photographs and strange artifacts. The elderly couple regaled them with stories of the house and the surrounding woods, tales that seemed to blend fact and folklore in a manner that left the young couple feeling uneasy but intrigued. After an hour or so of conversation, the elderly man led Emily and Mark to their room. It was quaint and surprisingly modern, with a neatly made bed and a large window that overlooked the dense forest. They again offered to pay for their stay, but the old man insisted. "No need for that. We're just happy to have you here." The young couple went to bed, the creaking of the old house and the occasional rustle of leaves outside their window their only lullabies. They rose early the next morning, careful not to disturb their hosts. On a table near the front door, they left an envelope with a generous sum of money, hoping to express their gratitude. Then they quietly made their way back to the car and set off towards the next town. Emily and Mark enjoyed a hearty breakfast at a small diner, where they recounted their overnight stay to the restaurant owner, a burly man with a thick mustache and a kind smile. The owner's face turned ashen as he listened. "That can't be," he said in disbelief. "That house burned down 2 years ago. The couple who lived there perished in the fire." Emily and Mark exchanged stunned glances, their hearts racing. They were certain of what they had seen and experienced, so they decided to return to the house, hoping to clear up the confusion. As they approached the familiar gravel driveway, their hearts sank. The house was no longer there. In its place was a charred skeleton of what once was, a burned-out shell that lay silently amid the encroaching forest. Emily and Mark got out of the car, their footsteps crunching on the gravel as they approached the ruins. The sight of the devastation was almost too much to bear. Mark noticed something unusual amid the debris and pointed it out to Emily. Among the scattered remnants of the house, a charred table lay partially burned under the ash and rubble. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the shape of the table. It was the very one they had seen by the front door. Mark knelt beside it and with trembling hands began to sift through the debris. A low, mournful cry escaped Emily as she saw what lay on the table. The envelope they had left behind the previous night was unmistakably there, partially scorched, but still intact. Mark gingerly picked it up, his fingers trembling as he opened it. The money inside was still crisp and untouched by the flames. As they stood there, stunned and speechless, the air seemed to grow colder, and a faint whispering sound rustled through the trees, as though the forest itself was lamenting. Unable to comprehend what had happened, Emily and Mark stumbled back to their car and drove away in silence, the image of the burned-out house and the envelope now burned into their memories. Their once mundane journey had become an encounter with the inexplicable, a night spent in a place where time and reality blurred, and a reminder that sometimes the boundary between the living and the dead is not as solid as it seems. The house had vanished, the fire had claimed it, but the memory of that eerie night lingered. In a quaint little town where everyone knew each other's business, the news of a formal dance at the old Grand Hotel spread like wildfire. The excitement was palpable, and it seemed that no one could talk of anything else. Among those eagerly awaiting the event was a young man named Thomas. Handsome and kind-hearted, Thomas had his eye on a young woman from his school named Clara. Clara was sweet and gentle, but her family was not well off. Despite her modest means, Thomas thought she would be the perfect companion for the dance. And so one afternoon, he presented her with a bouquet of fresh wildflowers, which he'd picked and arranged especially for her. She was overjoyed by the gesture, and even more so to accept his invitation to the dance. As she walked home, Clara basked in the fluorescence of her bouquet. Her chest filled with warmth as she inhaled deeply, and the gentle breeze carried her name through the flowers. She'd never felt so special, so eager for what was to come. But as Thomas saved up for a new suit and made reservations at a charming restaurant, Clara had no idea what she was going to wear. She didn't have any money, especially not for an outfit she'd only wear on one occasion, nor did she have any sisters or any friends of a similar size. Clara was fretting about it for days, and her excitement was overtaken by anxiety as the evening of the dance approached. "Maybe you can rent a dress," her mother suggested gently one morning. Clara's face brightened at the idea. Though she was skeptical about finding something elegant enough, she decided to take her mother's advice. There was a pawn shop not far from their home filled with forgotten curiosities, and Clara made her way there, her heart pounding with both hope and trepidation. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old leather and dust. The shopkeeper, a gruff man with a bushy mustache, eyed her intensely as she browsed through the racks of clothing and trinkets. After what felt like an eternity, Clara's eyes landed on a beautiful white satin evening gown. It was delicate, with intricate lacework and a shimmering, elegant sheen, and it was her size, too. Clara hesitated for a moment, her fingers brushing against the smooth fabric. The price tag was modest, and the shopkeeper offered an even lower rate when he saw her interest. "I'll take it," she said, her voice filled with a mix of relief and excitement. She could hardly believe her luck. The shopkeeper wrapped the gown in papers, and Clara took it home, her spirits lifted. When the night of the dance arrived, Clara was a vision of grace and beauty. The gown hugged her figure perfectly. Thomas, upon seeing her, was awestruck. They made their way to the hotel, and as they entered, the ballroom was abuzz with admiration. Clara felt like she was walking on air, her worries forgotten. The evening was everything she had dreamed of. She danced with Thomas and many others, her laughter mingling with the music. But as the night wore on, Clara began to feel faint and dizzy. She put it down to the excitement and exertion of dancing. "I think I've danced too much," she told Thomas, her voice barely above a whisper. Concern etched onto his face. He helped her out of the ballroom and into the cool night air. They arrived at Clara's small home, where she went straight to her room. Thomas, though reluctant to leave her, returned to the dance. He promised to check in on her later. Clara lay down in her bed, hoping that a good rest would help her feel better. Morning came, but Clara did not wake. Her mother, frantic with worry, found her daughter's lifeless body in the early hours of the day, cold and unresponsive. Her mother's screams pierced the quiet house, drawing neighbors and Thomas, who had returned to check on Clara. The doctor was called, and he conducted a preliminary examination. He was baffled by the cause of Clara's death and suggested an autopsy to uncover the mystery. The coroner, a meticulous man with a reputation for thoroughness, undertook the task with solemn care. The results were chilling. Clara had been poisoned, but not by any conventional means. The autopsy revealed traces of embalming fluid in her bloodstream, the substance used to preserve bodies, and it was determined that the fabric had contained a lethal amount of the toxic fluid, which soaked into Clara's pores as she danced. The shopkeeper was questioned, and after some prodding, he admitted that the gown had come from an undertaker's helper. The helper had sold it to him under the guise of a donation, but it had not been a donation at all. The dress had been worn by a young woman who passed away tragically. The helper stole it just before the woman was buried, hoping to make a quick profit. Thomas was devastated by the news, and Clara's mother was left to mourn her daughter. The pawn shop was closed, and the shopkeeper and undertaker's helper were both arrested, though the damage was already done. The Grand Hotel where the dance had been became a symbol of sorrow, a place where no one would dare host a joyful event, and eventually it shuttered as well. The story became a cautionary tale whispered by mothers to their daughters, a reminder that dangers can lurk in the most unexpected places. But amidst the grief, a memorial was erected in her honor, a quiet garden where wildflowers bloomed every spring. Though Clara was gone, her memory lived on, not in the haunting silence of an empty ballroom, but in the gentle breeze that carried her name through the flowers.